My name is Donna Johnson. I've been a women's rights activist for more than 3 decades. I'm honored to be on this platform today with two women human rights defenders, both mothers, both living in exile in Canada. I must admit to having a kind of reverence for these women. To me, they represent, through their commitment and sacrifice, not only the very best of what we as humans can be, but badly needed hope for the world and for women. Ketty Nivyabandi is a journalist, artist, poet, and writer from Burundi. In 2015, amidst a brutal crackdown on peaceful protest, Ketty led a women-only march in the streets of Bujumbura against Burundi's president, an action that led to her being targeted by her government and having to flee with her 2 small children. Ketty has recently been appointed Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada, the English-speaking branch. Congratulations, Ketty, and a warm welcome to our activist forum.
Congratulations, Ketty.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Rehana.
Rehana Hashmi is from Pakistan. She is currently activist in residence at Carleton University. Rehana and I together will interview Ketty about her personal experiences as a human rights defender in Burundi, and about her experiences in exile, and about what it means to be a woman doing this work.
Before I answer, I'd like to read something that will probably make it easier to picture the mood that was at the time in 2015 and the context in which I took the actions that I did. So this is an excerpt of something I've been working on that sort of tells the story of 2015 onwards. And this is a scene from about 2 months before the protests in May. It was the day where the one very famous journalist had been arrested, and after a lot of public pressure, he was released, and this was the day when the day of his release. The city holds its breath. Women wait on the long, twisty road from Muramvya, the pre-colonial heart of Burundi. Babies strapped on their backs, bright neon fabric elegantly draped over their shoulders. They wait to catch a glimpse of the new legend. For days, they lined up the gates of Muramvya's central prison, baskets and baskets of green bananas swinging on their heads. A silent braid of female resistance is slowly forming in the belly of our hills. For these women, freedom is no political game. It is an urge, a lifeline, something to nourish lavishly with green bananas. We follow the crowds to the RPA radio station, and history is unfolding before our eyes. The air smells of change. I feel that something has shifted in our collective consciousness. Outside the green walls of the radio station, crowds are foaming. A few adventurous boys are perched on the jacaranda trees of the Bujumbura Golf Club, where the wealthiest spend their afternoons shooting golf balls and obscure business deals. A group of women, all tomato sellers who had been harassed by the police in previous months, are singing, dancing, screaming. They forget their baskets, which fall on the ground. Tomatoes roll one by one like marbles on the burning tarmacked road and crush into a thick red paste. Later that night, I write on my Facebook page, "The voice of the people is a river, a free and giant torrent which no man can contain. When she wakes, she clears her own path, braves all barriers, and imposes herself like a powerful sovereign. She knows no fear, and those who try to hold her drown in her currents. Wise is the one who hears her early and from a distance when she still whispers. Wise is the one who can read her clear waters. This morning she roared, the beautiful, a thunderous drum in the streets of our little land. one would have to be tragically deaf not to hear her. So that's what I wrote. Basically, this was the context about 2 months before protests later erupted. After it was announced that the head of state would run for a third and unconstitutional term in office, and people began protesting in the streets. To go back to your original question of courage and how one cultivates courage, or what is it perhaps that may have given me the courage to do what I did. I just want to say that first and foremost, it's about doing the right thing. Courage is about, it's not about not being afraid. It's about knowing what you have to do, knowing that you have to do the right thing at that very moment, and knowing that that is more important than any other fear that you may have. And I think that came from the way that I was raised. I was raised by a single mother. My parents were divorced, and I was raised by a mother who always faced life head on. She herself was a daughter of my grandmother, another very strong woman whose husband had been assassinated and who had to raise her children in great adversity in a very patriarchal society, and yet managed to impose herself and be very, very respected. So I grew up really seeing women leading and women standing for what was right, regardless of the consequences. I saw that, and I think I integrated that as something that's absolutely normal. And I also grew up with a concept of ubuntu, which is that we are all deserving of inherent dignity because of who we are as human beings. A profound sense, I think, of justice. I grew up with that. But then the artist in me is also very sensitive, and so I am very aware of injustice because of the suffering that injustice brings to those who are around us. So I think those things combined make it very difficult for me to stand by a situation of injustice. And although I am an introvert by nature, although I am a person who would very happily spend her life in a recluded place writing poetry, it is so unbearable to see in situations of injustice around me, knowing that I could, in a way, do something about it and then stand by. So that's what happened. In the midst of those protests, we were being tear gassed, we were being attacked, although we were not armed, and we were singing our national anthem and waving white handkerchiefs. And I was outraged by the way that the police was reacting and attacking us and attacking peaceful protesters. And out of that outrage comes those actions, which in the moment you don't think, oh, I am doing a courageous thing. You're just doing what seems right for you in that moment. And I think it's really important for people to understand that it's nothing extraordinary, and it's not something that's out of reach to anyone. It's really about following your heart's calling and honoring and being true to yourself and honoring who you are at every moment, even when your life is at risk. So we had been, I had been in the weeks before mobilizing women to protest as well. Peaceful protests had been happening for days, and those protesters had been repressed, had been shot, had been arrested, had been tortured. And so there was a state of complete outrage across the population, and especially for women. These were their sons, their brothers, their relatives, their friends who they were seeing. And yet that outrage had no avenue. It had no space to express itself. And that's what really drove me to organize women's protests, because traditionally, Burundian women do not have the right to speak publicly in a public sphere. You're always spoken for. And I felt that it was critical that our voice, which was calling for the end of violence, it was calling for peace, had to be heard and had to be heard powerfully. So that's how I mobilized a wide range of women to come and march. And when we did so, and we did so peacefully, we were met with a brutality that I had never, ever experienced. And so the image that is often seen when I'm kneeling in front of a water cannon is basically about hours, 4 to 5 hours after marching, being tear gassed, being, some of us being beaten, and for hours and hours endlessly, we seemed to be at war with our own security forces, and yet we posed no threat. And so they, at some point, they changed the policemen who were there, because the original group of policemen themselves were dismayed and just had no intention of arresting us. And they brought in a more aggressive group of policemen. And towards the end, they brought in this huge water cannon that kept following us and kept gassing us. And at some point, and one woman had fainted from tear gas. So at some point, I was just outraged, and then decided to turn back and go and face that water cannon. And what I was doing was really facing the person who was driving that cannon and telling him, "What are you doing? We are here marching peacefully. How dare you? How dare you attack women who are expressing themselves and calling for the end of violence the way that you are doing so?" I was appealing, and that is the power of nonviolent protest. I was appealing to his own humanity. And that's what made me kneel down, because I could see up close, I could see him. And my message was, here I am, with no weapon, holding my white handkerchief, and meet me at this level of humanity as well. Meet the human in me, and I know you are better than this. I know that you can. You're the one driving this, and it makes no sense to you as well. This is sort of what I was telling him. That was my statement, and in many ways, that was a poem. That was probably my best poem.